people like us, what's our goal? Our goal is to outperform the S&P 500 in a tax efficient way. So we have to make more money than the S&P 500 makes and after taxes, because the really, really good thing about the S&P 500 is as long as you just keep holding it, you actually pay no taxes, because you only pay taxes, capital gains, once you sell. So that's our goal, right? Now, the people who are attracted to this goal is usually the people that we like to call ourselves smart, right? And these smart people, we like to put ourselves in the bucket of we're the people that like to solve complex problems, okay? Now, there's a problem with this because often in life, the answer is actually simple. And it took me a really long time to finally realize this one. So, it's the holy grail. Everybody's trying to outperform the S&P 500. Everybody's scouring through the internet to try and find a way to outperform it in that tax-efficient manner. And going back to how we are the smart people, we've gone to school, it's been drilled into our head, hey, we're the only ones that can solve these mathematic problems. We're the ones that get the A, all of that stuff, complex things, right? And then because we did good in mathematics class, then we did physics and other things and so on and so on and so on, right? So it's drilled into our psychology that this is who we are. So we start to see the world in a complex manner, but that, I think, is a bias. That is us actually putting ourselves inside of our box, our mind inside of a box. So I believe one of the answers are imagine you ask this question. I heard this from Tim Ferriss, what does it look like if you're trying to solve a problem of some sort? What does it look like if it was actually easy? Now, by doing this, you stop focusing on all this complex stuff over here, and you allow your mind to jump outside of the box, go over the hurdle, and start thinking on the other end of the spectrum. What if it was actually really, really easy? What if it took no work? Because there is something weird with us. There is something weird with our egos. Like, oh, I need to read all of these books. I need to go through the internet. It's like what's it called? Like a gold rush. I need to put in the most work to dig the largest hole, dig the deepest hole, and then I'll find the knowledge that no one else has, and then I'll make the most money. But if the goal is to beat the S&P 500 after taxes in a safe and meaningful way, and in a simple way, how would we do that over, say, a 10-year or 20-year period? Think about this portfolio. You went 50% long, so you bought in 50%, your portfolio is 50% S&P 500, right? And then with the other 50%, you just bought the NASDAQ 100. I'm pretty sure that portfolio is going to outperform the S&P 500 with all of those criteria after taxes, in a safe way. Because if we actually think about the S&P 500 itself, I think it's actually too diversified with 500 companies. A lot of the returns, I believe, actually come from the companies that are higher up. They have a higher weightings in the bucket. So imagine, as an example, the S&P 500 consists of 500 companies. The 500th company is a very, very small weighting, whereas the top company is a larger weighting. And, going with the NASDAQ is more heavily weighted to the tech stocks because they're higher up in that bucket. So I believe if we track that portfolio over the next 10 years and 20 years, as long as when we're measuring it's not after like a big crash, like a financial crisis, because it's expected that the NASDAQ would drop more during a financial crisis. That makes sense. But during the bull markets, I believe it will make more. So that's one idea. Just think about that. Second portfolio is, imagine this. If the goal is to beat it over the course of your life, and you should honestly be thinking in terms of multiple decades. Honestly, 20 years is not even enough for most of us. We should be actually thinking 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years. I think we should actually be thinking about holding, investments in the stock market literally until we die. So a lot of financial advisors, they actually advise over time, you reduce the percentage that you have in stock market investments and you put them into things like just a standard savings account because it's safer. You're not actually going to lose anything. But it just doesn't make any sense. Warren Buffett famously said that, like, why would you put all of your money in bonds, even though they're extremely safe? Over a 10-year period, they're just never going to win. It's highly unlikely that bonds would outperform the S&P 500. So we need to be thinking that time frame. 10 years is small, actually. 20 years is actually pretty small for a lot of us. If we're going to be thinking, like, how old are we actually going to be living to? Especially if you're the age of 20 now, or 30 now, or 40 now. With the rise of technology and all that, I think it's going to be realistic that the majority of people, if you take good care of your health, should be able to live to at least 100. So, imagine this strategy. We go 90% S&P 500 in the portfolio, and then we open up a really, really, really small position with that last 10%, preferably on a pullback of some sort. If there was a 30% pullback on the S&P 500 or a 40% pullback, or even a 20% pullback, with that little pullback, if we got that last 10% allocation of the portfolio and then leveraged it just with a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of leverage, right? So the overall portfolio is like 0.1% leverage, because over time you will get chewed up with the fees as well. And with this strategy, you will have to, depending on how it's structured, you may actually have to put in a little bit more money to fund these fees potentially. Or there's other assets, there's other things that you can look at, like leveraged ETFs. But that's like the main structure of the portfolio. It's 90% S&P 500, and then the last little bit is a little bit of leverage, right? And see how we're thinking here? We're thinking in a really simple manner. 2 assets. It doesn't actually have to be so complex. So now you got to start thinking, if you're actually that smart guy, can you even beat the S&P 500 after taxes alone? Right? Can you beat the portfolios that I've just given to you? Can you honestly beat them? The next thing after that is, these portfolios that I've just handed to you, or even the S&P 500 itself, the benefit is you do no work at all. You literally do nothing, right? So if you're actually, going on the internet and trying to get as much information as possible, you're trying to research about companies every day, and you're trying to trade these markets back and forth, or, all of that, that's great. I'm not against knowledge, but that is actually a form of opportunity cost. You could actually park all your money into the portfolios that I've just given you, and then with that extra time, made money somewhere else, right? So that's kind of like the mindset. That's how I honestly believe you should be thinking about it. Because otherwise, if and you might have a bug inside of you where you just love the markets and you just could be playing the game, and there's nothing wrong with that. So, I'll have a separate amount of money, which is, hey, I'm just messing around with this money. This is kind of like my gambling money. Instead of doing like sports gambling or that type of stuff, going to the casino, or like whatever, anything that just wastes money. Instead of doing that, I'll mess around with the market. Sometimes you just need to have that little itch. But what you're most likely going to find out is that portfolio over a 10-year period, it's definitely not going to beat the S&P 500. And especially when you start thinking about the tax consequences of that portfolio. If you're doing anything frequently, especially in places like Australia, you're just going to get chewed up with the taxes. But, if it's like just play money, it's a little bit of fun and games, I'm all for it. It's fine. But also at the same time, just understand you're messing around with something that's kind of dangerous, because even though you've kind of separated in your head, hey, this other money, it's a separate thing, is it actually separate in your head? Because what happens if you lose that money that you think is separate? Maybe you're like, hey, just this one time, I'm going to take out a little bit of money from my S&P 500 portfolio, my portfolio that I'm never supposed to touch, and I'm gonna funnel it over to it's my investment portfolio, not the gambling portfolio, not the playing around portfolio, right? And I've seen this happen many, many times before. I'm only going to do it once, lose that money again, you repeat the cycle, eventually you got no S&P 500 left, and you literally lose all your money doing this other thing, trying to outperform the S&P. So, yeah, that's a little bit of information for you guys. Honestly, I believe this is like true wisdom. And this is actually the goal. So the actual goal is, yes, get returns like the S&P 500. Try, if you can, to outperform it with little effort. It should be easy. So you have your time. Because the most valuable asset we have is what? It's time. Spend it on things that actually give you joy. That's the goal. That's the overall picture. That's what we're trying to achieve. You don't want to just be wasting time for the sake of wasting time, all right? So, and then I've seen a lot of people, once they hear this knowledge, they've already had a sunk cost bias of, hey, I've already dedicated 2 years of researching books and stuff about how to outperform S&P 500. No, it can't possibly be this simple. So they continue on their path because they want that complex answer. That is a form of ego, and you got to accept it. You got to have a harsh look at yourself and come and accept this is the reality. Don't play games to yourself. You are the only person, right? You are the person that you don't want to fool. You never want to fool yourself. It leads to many, many other problems where you lose your self-image, you lose your confidence, right? You lose who you are, and it goes down a really negative path. You lose that step, that energy in your step, the bounce in your step, right? That is something. How you wake up in the morning, there's a value to that. What is your energy? What is your aura? Do people want to be around you? Yes or no? Right? So this is what I personally like about investing, is we have to be really introspective. We have to look inside. We have to analyze us. And there's so many life lessons here in the game of investing. It's all about psychology. That's what I love. All right, guys, that wraps up this video. If you've got any questions, you know what to do. Post them down below. See you in the next one.